The war is inside me. The war is outside me. I remember everything in slow motion. My memories are fragmented. I don't know who I am. Before the war, I had a future. Now I only have the war. My war began at basic training when I met Dan. Dan could smile and get away with saying anything. In a southern drawl, he called me white brain. Then he would give me this dumb look. My mom and my dad would have seriously disapproved of Dan. Dan would always go too far. He would always say stuff about Sergeant Curtis. He said she was a bitch, a slut, and a dyke. I didn't tell him to shut up because I didn't want to sound like a liberal. I wasn't a liberal. I was a soldier. I wondered if I were really like a soldier. I wondered if this was me. I wondered if I was different. I wanted the Army to make me different. I wanted to be the kind of man who could impress Sergeant Curtis. But she didn't look at me. She looked at Dan. When it was rumored she had been raped by a guy in our outfit, Dan snuck out that night and came back with his knuckles all bruised. They said the guy's attacker came up from behind. They said the guy couldn't name his attacker. When they sweated Dan about his knuckles, I came forward and said, "We had a fist fight." Dan smiled at me. They demoted Stephanie Curtis and assigned her to our unit. We all shipped out together. When I dream, I am awake. When I am awake, I dream. When I drink, I feel real. When I'm drunk, I know who I am. I'm White Brain. I'm the guy who came home without a scratch. I should have died with Stephanie and Dan. I should be back in the war. I'm too injured to be back in the war. No one can see that I'm injured. Unless you get too close to me. Unless you care about me. I wish I died in the war. I feel like I died in the war. I felt alive with Dan. I felt alive with Stephanie. I always felt alive with Richard because I hated him. It is hard for me to remember Richard's face. He could change in my mind. Sometimes he would fade. Richard was like many different people at the same time. Maybe Richard was shattered like I am. I wondered what happened to Richard. He came into the Army damaged and never came home. There we were at war. White Brain, Dan White Trash, Richard the rapist, and Stephanie. Richard would often drive the roads we were to keep clear. Our war became the study of suspicious gravels. Our war became laughter when we rested. Dan sang me happy birthday. I belonged in the Army. We were good soldiers. The war brought out the best in us. Even though Richard seemed distant, even though we suspected Richard of rape, Stephanie said our mission was more important than our feelings, our bodies, and our lives. And she was right. Richard would always spot the IED. Richard saved many lives. Richard was helping win the war. We were all helping win the war. We were helping win the war by seeing what was hidden behind bricks. We were helping win the war by seeing what was hidden inside ourselves. We were helping win the war by seeking a hidden enemy. I once asked Stephanie what happened with Richard. She said we were fighting to free people who had every reason to kill each other. She said Americans had to stand together to win the war. She spent a lot of time with Dan. Once, when they were away on leave, she came back with her face bruised. She stayed with Dan. She rode with Richard. Richard would let her be the gunner. Dan once told me that Stephanie was from Oakland. He said that Stephanie's dad beat her a lot. Dan said that his father beat him a lot. I once asked her how she put up with it. She said bad people can do good things, and good people can do bad things. I killed people. I smashed people's houses. But I never let someone abuse me to win the war. I told Stephanie that. I told her I'd never let someone abuse me to win the war. Stephanie stared at me a moment and then walked away. Later she came back and sat down with me on my cot. She said if a soldier, any soldier, fell in love, it could get us all killed. That didn't stop us. Sometimes after a firefight, we would be together. When I was with Stephanie, I felt as if I finally found my home. She was with Dan when their vehicle was hit. Richard was killed trying to pull them out. When my war ended, the world felt different. The airport shops seemed pristine and far away. My mom met me and gave me a hug. We were quiet when we drove back. I always felt that she wanted me to be some kind of hippie. I was surprised when she asked to pray with me at Amanda's church. When we got to church, she seemed so sad that I felt angry and wanted to leave. Amanda's mom was there and she seemed nervous. I wished I were back with my unit. My homecoming was supposed to feel good. I felt so scared. Mom said Dad had left his second wife. She said his daughter was autistic. Amanda's dad lost the ministry, and her mom divorced him for cheating. Amanda was back from her second tour. She had a baby and never left the house. When I rode over to Amanda's house, I worried if the road was cleared of IEDs. Amanda kept a pistol on the table, and the baby cried a lot. She told me that Jim had lost his leg, but he was okay about it. We did tequila shots and watched the news. I gave the baby formula and called out for pizza.